are Gus Chambers and Paul Zalis. Gus Chambers is an award-winning television producer at the University of Montana Broadcast Media Center and Montana PBS. For more than 30 years, Gus has produced some of the most popular television documentaries on Montana's people and history, including Night of the Grizzlies, For This and Future Generations, 4-H, 6 Montana Stories, Hidden Fire, Backroads of Montana, and the highly anticipated See 'em Wrestle in the American West. Gus has received numerous awards for his work from the Montana Broadcasters Association and Greater Montana Foundation E.B. Craney Awards, the Communicator Awards, and Montana Addy Awards, and the Northwest Regional Emmy Awards. Paul Zalis is a writer, producer, and Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker. He is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. He was a journalist for many years, writing for various newspapers as well as United Press International, a public radio producer, and a college journalism instructor. He wrote and co-produced the Montana PBS documentary films For This and Future Generations about the historic rewriting of the Montana Constitution, and Glacier Park's Night of the Grizzlies about the almost mythic grizzly bear attacks in 1967 that eventually contributed to the overhaul of the National Park wildlife management. For the past 3 years, Zalis and Gus have been working together on the See 'em Wrestle in the American West documentary. Please help me welcome Gus Chambers and Paul Zalis.
Welcome to PBS Debate Night. Paul will be representing the Democratic Party. I'll handle the other side. We're determined to make this symposium great again.
Yeah, he did tell you, though, that there's a court-ordered restraining order to keep us 20 feet apart after working together for 3 years.
Yes.
Before we show you the film, there's our little, which will have a prologue. There's our little prologue, and that all begins with, how do you get the idea to make a film about Charlie Russell? And that came from this guy at a particular moment in time. And he'll tell you briefly that story.
No, I'm not telling that story.
You are.
No, you're supposed to thank some folks.
That's next.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I got this idea in the shower. All good ideas come in the shower. Anybody out there feel the same way? Yeah, there you go. For some reason, your head's clear.
Which is actually amazing for the state of Montana, because Charlie is our patron saint. It's just, how did anybody ever miss that up until now? Once Gus had that idea, the next step is, where do we pick up Charlie Russell's trail? I mean, I'm a journalist, I tell stories. Gus has been working in the television business for years. We tell stories. Where do we begin with Charlie's story? And we are brand new and fresh with this, unlike most of you folks here who've spent years, decades, careers on Russell. So the first person we go to talk to is the most recent biographer, John Tolliver, and who did, as you all know, the sort of the quintessential up until now Charlie Russell biography. And he told us the next person we need to go and kiss the hem of is Brian Dippy. Brian, as I think most of you will probably know, is the Jedi of Russell world. And Brian then in turn told me where I needed to go to get the groundwork done. And a major part of that groundwork is the museums. One of the two sides of this coin. One of the regrettable things that happened, and Michael touched on this, in Montana, is we lost a lot of the Russell legacy. There was a Russell diaspora that went to museums and collections around the country. Unfortunately, the state of Montana did not pony up when they had a chance to pretty much buy everything. The good news is it went to places like the Gilcrease and the Amon Carter. And thank God for these institutions because they preserved the pieces of the Russell puzzle that are missing in Montana. But in making our film, we had to go to all these places and put the pieces back together and then condense a voluminous amount of material. Gus, how many hours of footage? Oh, well over 100 interviews, everything, hours of footage.
300.
Really?
Yes.
Anyways, we've got to get that down to a 3-hour, once we're rid of sponsorship and credits and all that sort of thing. Probably a 2.5-hour film, which will premiere in Montana in Great Falls on September 9th. And then we hope to bring it to many of the other Intermountain Western states, including Oklahoma, Texas, Wyoming, Colorado, where Russell's story is particularly important. Beyond that, 6 to 9 months afterwards, there'll be a 1-hour national show. Gus and I will discuss little film clips as we move along, but we're running short of time, so we're going to just jump right into the film, and we begin.
They're short, they're raw, they're not color corrected, there's no audio sweetening. So what you're going to see is as basic as possible. And most of them are from hour one. And we're going to just sort of start at the beginning, which was Russell's itch to leave St. Louis.
If Russell could not quite paint at Weimar's level, at least early in his career, it might have been his own doing. He never seriously took art lessons, barely surviving 3 days at the St. Louis Art School, where he was instructed to draw squares, cubes, and still lifes, but basically refused.
Russell never attended an art school, but he watched others work. And watched, obviously, with great success. So the boy who had not loved school never went to school to be an artist. But life itself and experience and observation figured dramatically into his artwork.
Art, he was good at, exceptionally good, at least his own version of it. But in terms of general education, young Charlie's response was truancy. Instead of going to school, he would hide his books and head down to the riverfront, or to the levees, or to the mule markets.
The waterfront was crowded with adventurers. Some were old-timers with well-worn buckskins and weathered countenances. The rough characters there, like the lad, took time to answer his questions and tell him bits about the line far out where the riverboats and wagon trains were destined to go.
The boy attended candlelit magic lantern shows, viewed the wonders of the West, heard stories about cowboys, Indians, and outlaws, and reveled in everything. Charlie couldn't wait to go west. He tried to stow away on a boat, then ran away from home, attempting once to set out for Montana, hitching rides on farm wagons. He survived for weeks by his wits, but finally gave up and returned home. After years of witnessing his struggles with formal education, Charlie's parents made one last stab at getting their son school. They sent him to a military academy in New Jersey with a friend.
Charlie's father told him that if he would go east with me to school for 6 months, that at the end of his time, he'd let him go west.
Charlie lasted only 3 months. He swapped drawings of Western scenes for other boys' homework, which managed to get him reprimanded and tethered to seemingly endless sessions of guard duty. By winter, he was back home in St. Louis. And by spring, just 5 days before his 16th birthday, and at last with his parents' begrudging permission, and just like Huckleberry Finn, he was lighting out for the territory. If Russell could not quite paint at Weimar's level, at least early in his career, it might have been his own doing. He never seriously took art lessons, barely surviving 3 days at the St. Louis Art School, where he was instructed to draw square.
Okay. There you have his itch to leave St. Louis.
And as he's setting up the next clip, just hearing, I don't know if you recognize the voice, the narrator is J.K. Simmons, Oscar winner for Whiplash. J.K.'s a Montana boy. I would write stuff for the narrator, and when I go into the studio and J.K. starts reading the words I wrote, I would get goosebumps. It is, Gus can attest to this, to have professional actors read and contribute to the drama of the film, and to have the budget to be able to hire them to do it is a gift.
It makes all the difference in the
Yeah,
world.
we'll talk more about our other actors as well.
Headed to Judith Basin next, and who, of course, is he going to meet there that's going to, he'll be apprentice of? Jake Hoover, good guess, here we go.
Pike Miller and the Buckskin Kid spent a week in Helena putting together a wagon and provisions. Then for 3 weeks traveled 200 miles with the wind east through the crazy mountains and the belts to the Judith Basin. The region had been a prehistoric inland sea, but in 1880 it was a sea of grass surrounded by a coastline of snow-capped mountains. In many ways, it was this view and time that would always stay with Charles Marion Russell.
When I came west, I got the cream. Let the come-latelys have the skim milk.
Pike and Charlie were headed to tend sheep, but central Montana then was predominantly cattle country with an estimated 500,000 head in the territory. The two arrived in a snowstorm and stayed for a night at Bill Carell's home. Pike told the Carells that he had just returned from the States and introduced his young companion as Kid Russell. Charlie had a paint box with brushes, watercolors, black crayon, and a ball of beeswax wrapped in a flannel cloth. Pike said, "Show him what you can do."
He painted a few horses on the backs of some old envelopes. They amused us very much, but we placed very little value on them, and they were eventually burned in my heating stove.
In the early Russell years, before the Buckskin Kid became the legend, delighting in and then tossing a piece of Russell's art would be a familiar story. It probably didn't take too much thinking for the Buckskin Kid to quickly realize that tending sheep didn't suit him. Neither did Pike Miller.
Miller did not understand the boy's nature and was not backward about telling me that I was no good. So we split up, and I didn't think Pike missed me much, as I was considered pretty ornery.
Ornery and unhappy. Charlie spent more time sculpting than herding. From working at his father's brick and tile works in St. Louis, he had learned something about clay and how to fire it. And while working for Pike Miller, he built a crude kiln.
He was supposed to be herding sheep, but was modeling deer, horses, cattle, bears, and other creatures and characters. These he gave to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Had I at the time the slightest knowledge of the fabulous value that would later attach to the artist's model,
Soon Charlie geared himself up for a different role. He donned his beaded buckskin shirt and he paid a Piegan Indian named War Wound $45 for a mare and a pinto pony he would call Monty. Over the decades, it was often said that Monty became one of Charlie Russell's most cherished friends and would stay with him over thousands of miles crisscrossing central Montana.
We were kids together. We have always been together. We don't exactly talk to each other, but we sure sat with one another.
But these were their first miles together, and that first evening, adrift and homeless together, it wouldn't be difficult to imagine the kid mumbling self-doubting questions to his new pony. As the sun faded and slowly climbed up the crazy mountains, Charlie and Monty camped along the Judith River.
With no money or grub, life did not seem joyful, and I felt mighty blue. While I was wondering where my next meal was coming from, a rider with several pack horses appeared and made his camp on the river near me.
He was Jake Hoover, a trapper Charlie had seen in the mountains before. Jake asked the 16-year-old where he kept his grub.
I ain't got I answered, and then I told him my troubles. He listened till I was through, and while I was talking, I couldn't help feeling he would be my friend. Well, he said, if you want to, you can come with me. You can stay till you get something better to do.
Stay he did. For almost 2 years, he joined forces with this bearded, long-haired mountain man who never traveled without a .44 Winchester across his saddle. Years later, Charlie said Jake shot a rifle faster than any man he had ever known. Hoover had just sold elk and deer that he had killed to local ranchers along the Judith River, and he was on his way home to his cabin on the South Fork of the Judith in Pig Eye Basin. Finally, Charlie was about to shed his 16-year-old St. Louis skin and become the mountain man's apprentice.
Early next morning, we broke camp and started for the mountains. Shut off from the outside world, it was a hunter's paradise bounded by walls of mountains and containing miles of grassy open spaces, more green and beautiful than any man-made parks. Nature had surely done the best, and no king of the old times could have claimed a more beautiful, more bountiful domain. This life suited me.
He had so many memories, he had to have so many memories here, and I'll guarantee every one of them was art-filled. The scenery, the times we had with Jake Hoover, the experiences with the animals, I'm sure he felt lucky. And it was just a part of not being hooked up and connected with the real world, because this was Charlie's world.
As we set up for the next segment,
And the buckskin kid spent a week in Helena putting together.
as we set up for the next segment, couple things that struck me again. This is not just Charlie Russell's story, this film. It's C.M. Russell and the American West. And that's a big part of it. Gus beautifully shot, and you'll see this when you eventually see the film, Montana the way it still is, the way Charlie would have been so happy to still see. And that is a big part of the history, the mythology, whatever, of the West, but the landscape is a big part of our story here. The other thing, we'll talk in a moment, the next segment, about Bill Pullman, Charlie's voice. But before I forget, the other thing about making a film, and I'll pass this over to Gus, is collecting and getting photographs. The ultimate quarry has been the Gilcrease. Diana Folson and Jen McKinney, wherever they both are, held our hands and helped us immensely in constructing this package that eventually becomes a movie. But Gus could tell you about tracking down photographs.
Yes, and I can't thank enough both Dianas, Diana Cox and Diana Folson, and Jen and Renee, who I just met yesterday. Most of these photographs came from the Gilcrease. Editing a documentary is always an evolving sort of process, and I'll be changing out things the night before it's broadcast. And one of the things I've already changed is that little sheep segment where he's herding sheep with Pike Miller. I found a herd of sheep being rushed down the main street of Utica, Montana, and you can clearly see Utica Mercantile on a building in the background with all of these sheep in the foreground. I just wish that fuzzy little figure herding them was Charlie Russell. But anyway, so that's a new thing. By the way, before I forget, I've always wanted to call this documentary 310 to Utica. Thought it was a Cowboys are next. You want to?
Cowboys. The ultimate cowboy voice for this film is Bill Pullman, and we'll be recording him again in hour 3, actually on Tuesday. Bill he was another guy. We recorded him in Bozeman. We put him in a little tiny recording booth, and he started to read, and it was another one of those moments of goosebumps. I mean, he physically started to turn into Charlie. Bill Pullman actually kind of looks a little bit like Charlie anyway, but his voice, as you'll gather when you finally see the completed film, is a man reflecting back at his life. And this is the second segment of the Cowboys where you'll hear...
Do you want to hear the second segment or the first segment?
Whatever's up next. It works.
By 1882, Charlie had earned enough from selling furs and meat to buy a train ticket to St. Louis to visit his family. Back home, it wouldn't be hard to imagine that the kid, about to turn 18, was almost prancing with this new Montana version of himself. He soon became the center of attention.
He was a Westerner now. Even the way he talked, the way he walked, and the battered old broad-brimmed felt hat he persisted in wearing. He half-heartedly recalled there weren't much call for speech-making out in his country. Then he would enthrall his listeners with some of the stories Jake Hoover had told him, garnishing them with colorful bits of cow country lingo he had picked up.
He was so entertaining and enthusiastic about Montana and the West that he quickly acquired a sidekick, a cousin who joined him on the way back to Big Sky Country. But outside of Billings, 2 weeks after they arrived, his cousin suddenly died of Rocky Mountain fever. Some say Charlie had guardian angels. Some say he moved on the skin of the earth in a remarkably providential way. He was the kind of person who didn't really have plans, but the right things came his way. This time, it was a cattle outfit with a trail boss looking to hire.
There was a little snow, as it was early in April, but after riding about 15 miles, I struck an outfit coming in to receive 1,000 cows for the 12Z and V outfit up in the basin. The trail boss hired me to help him out on the trip west.
They were headed for the Judith Basin, and the apprentice mountain man, in a right time, right place moment, was about to become a cowboy. In essence, leaping across western epochs and into a time that would essentially brand him.
He had lived through, he thought, a great experience. His regret was he wasn't there 30 years before, when it would have been even greater, but he was so glad he was there in the 1880s.
Russell's first cattle drive took a month to reach the Judith Basin, and what the kids saw when he arrived was mammoth. A spring roundup of 85,000 head of cattle over almost 100 square miles. And yet another right time, right place moment. A trail boss for a big outfit, Horace Brewster, was short on cowhands.
Russell showed up one morning at camp. He had 50 cents in his pocket and looked like he needed a job. I kind of took to him and put him on his horse wrangler. He had never heard it, so I sent Charlie Coathay in the BD outfit to show him how to wrangle.
The night wrangler has to see that the horses don't drift off across country. The wrangler, riding slowly around the bunch, sings to himself, not only because he's lonely, but to warn the horses where he is so that they won't be startled when he suddenly looms up over them. One frightened horse, snorting and floundering up on his feet, can start the whole herd. Night herding, sundown to sunup, is a long shift.
The teenage nighthawk from St. Louis was probably nervous when he got the job to herd horses and to keep them from roaming. In the beginning, he held them maybe too tightly. That was okay by his boss, Horace Brewster, who would say, "I'd rather ride them hungry than hunt them."
Charlie weren't a good roper nor a good bronc rider. Didn't seem to be particularly interested in acquiring either knack. Many a time when steer broke out of hold up, I've seen Charlie steady pony and never make a move when he could have had a throw.
He was the most scared fellow I ever saw when there was the least chance of anyone getting hurt. A fellow got thrown off a bucking horse, Charlie'd actually turned white.
Although I worked for many years on the range, I am not what people think a cowboy should be. I was neither a good roper nor a rider. I was a night wrangler. How good I was, I'll leave it to the people I worked for to say. In the spring, I ran horses. In the fall, I herded beef. I worked for the big outfits and always held my job.
Charlie stayed with the outfit all summer, and next fall, old man True hired him to night herd beef. For the best part of the next 11 years, Charlie sang to the horses and cattle.
By 1882,
Real quick, you ready to go?
Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
let's just go on to the next one.
Montana had two styles of cowboys, Californian and Texan. West of the Rockies, cowboys came with a Spanish flair, and some crossed over the divide. But for the most part, on the east side of Montana, Texas cowboys were the stars. The men who had shoved cattle north through the gauntlet of rain, snow, blistering heat, numbing cold, rivers, stampedes, rustlers, outlaws, and Indians. They were, or liked to think of themselves as, the real cowboys.
All in all, my years on the trail were the happiest I ever lived. There were many hardships and dangers, of course. But when all went well, there was no other life so pleasant. Most of the time we were solitary adventurers, and our great land was fresh and new as a spring morning. And we were free and full of the zest of darers.
The main dynamic of these northern plains was the opening of new ranches in the 1880s. And all this grass and very few cattle. So now you had a vacuum. And the cattlemen love a vacuum with open grass. And so the cattle were being brought up from Nebraska, Kansas, where some of the herds were being kept, as well as thousands of head of cattle were brought around from the west coast to Oregon and Nevada. And the confluence was right over here. They were paying a lot of money to put cattle on these ranges. And the area that Charlie Russell called home.
I'm talking about the days of the open range, when there wasn't a wire from the Arctic Sea to the Gulf of Mexico.
I was with Texas cowpunchers from the time I was 11 years old. And I stayed with the cattle and went northward. There was all new country up there, and I wanted to see.
Russell and E.C. Teddy Blue Abbott probably were both born under the same western stars, and once they finally met, tending two different herds of cattle on bordering Montana roundups, they became immediate friends.
They liked to frolic, and I guess we were 10 years at some point, and there were all that many companions that were happy-go-lucky as they were, so they were fast friends.
He would put his horses on one side of a creek and I on the other. Then we would sit on a hill and watch them talk. I had a kazoo. I would play a tune and we would both laugh like two kids, which we were.
They were kids, pretty much the way most of the cowboys were. It was a young man's game. And it was a tough one.
Being a cowboy in Montana in the American West in the 1880s wasn't all Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. The hours were long, they slept out in rain and snow, and the pay was lousy. It was a crappy job. Today it's easy to romanticize it, and there were a lot of great things about it, but it's sort of like going before the mast on a whaling ship or being a lumberjack. This was hard work.
On a trail drive, a puncher might work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and he might have to travel 1,200 miles with no comforts other than a campfire and his bedroll. On a given day, a cowboy could find himself in the middle of a prairie fire, quicksand, or a stampede. And on any day, he could be thrown or kicked by a horse, charged by a steer, or half frozen on a winter search for strayed livestock. Complaining was considered unprofessional. It irritated others and evoked no sympathy whatsoever.
I was in two stampedes that I will never forget. One
one night just before time to come off guard, my partner and I met. I asked him what time it was, and he popped a match. Them parlor matches had just come out. I thought he'd have sense enough to pull away from the herd of the ways, but he didn't. At the flash of the match, they were off. I came so damn near to being killed that night. Well, it was all in the game. Cowpunchers knew it.
For all that could and often did go wrong, there were not many cowboys who would have traded their work and lives for anything else. Cowboy pride and stoicism, the ability to endure, became part of American mythology. Many of Russell's cowboy friends were part of the workforce that drove the cattle north to the Dakota and Montana territories, where cattle barons were hoping can't-miss opportunities would mean tripling their investments. It was wide open spaces and the wild, wild west, and everything was up for grabs. Soon the entire northern range would be claimed. By 1886, at a meeting in Miles City, cattle barons essentially divvied up 1/3 of Montana. Montana had two styles of cowboys.
Seeing John Tolliver, the biographer, on screen again, he carries the narrative, helps us along throughout the story. Reminds me of something. I was just in touch with him, as I am often this past week, and he said to me, when I was talking about Brian Dippy, he emailed back, "We stand on the shoulders of giants." And I keep thinking, I saw Don Reeves there, Byron Price, Jody Utter. I can't, the resources, the people who contributed to this film, we had extraordinary help. And one of the things that we feel really lucky about is with these hundreds of hours of footage is we've caught a generation of scholarships. So, like Brian and Rick Stewart, some of these legendary scholars who we've got them on camera, and they will eventually, all our footage will eventually go to either a museum or a university archive. So,
one of the most dramatic aspects in Charlie Russell's life was the killing winter of 1886-87, which in essence began his career. And it's the end of, you've seen a lot of things taken out of context. It's the end of our hour one. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, just two quick things. As Gus says, this is all in progress. There are blank spaces there. Gus is in the editing room still putting this together. The Killing Winter is particularly, not only for Charlie's story, as me as the writer here, The Killing Winter is the one big dramatic moment in Charlie's life. Normally, when you're doing a biopic, you're cradle to grave, but Charlie really, he hits this climax early on in his life. He works hard after that and achieves great fame, but it's not a natural sort of dramatic flowing story. That was one of the challenges of making this film. How do we tell a story about this legendary artist who contributes to our understanding of the West, but might not have a Greek tragedy or a Greek comedy kind of story to his own life? We think we found ways around that, but one of the most compelling moments, the moment that his breakthrough moment, he didn't realize it at the time, is this film clip.
One of my favorite stories, I'll make it brief, to tell about The Killing Winter. There wasn't a lot I knew I needed for this documentary years ago, but I knew The Killing Winter was going to be one of them. So every time there was a weather warning, heavy snow, gale force winds, please stay off the roads, I would pack the TV gear in the back of the car and head out into the wild blue yonder, because I knew I was going to need that footage, and I was really glad I did it, except this last winter, we had a hell of a winter. I could have waited 3 years and done it now.
Then again, the brink of death might not be on horseback or in the crush of a stampede or a skirmish with a band of Indians, but in the north wind.
The winter of 1886-87 is probably the most storied on the Montana range because it marks one of those ending points again in a particular phase of Western history.
It was a bad winter.
That was the celebrated winter that broke the back of the range cattle business. In late fall, we had several snowstorms, and I saw the first white owls I had ever seen. The Indians said they were a bad sign. Heap snow coming, very cold, and they sure hit it right.
In November, the first snowflakes came. The bottom fell out of the temperature. The ice storm just drove right into you. And that kind of set the stage for the winter to come.
The winter of 86 and 87, all men will remember. That was the hardest winter the open range ever saw.
There was no shelter for beast or man. The ground was frozen hard as rock. Merely riding all day in the saddle was an agony almost beyond endurance. The nights were 100 times worse. More than one night herder failed to return to the bunkhouse. His frozen body found the following spring.
We are having the worst weather ever heard of in this country. For the last 6 days, the mercury's been from 20 to 40 below. It's storming most of the time. It's so cold that when an animal lies down, their legs freeze.
The cowboys were reluctant to go out and check on the herds. Their lives were in peril. They were in the habit of taking their boots and sticking them in buckets of water and freezing their feet because that was better than the ambient temperature outside. It's hard to imagine today.
You know what Indians say? Indian make little fire, sit close. White man make big fire, sit back. Well, that winter, we made big fires and sat close too. And when I come home at the end of winter, I smelled so strong of smoke, the girls ordered me out of the house.
It was as though the Arctic regions had pushed down and enveloped us. Everything was white. Not a point of bare ground was visible in any direction. Fat young steers froze to death along their trails. The herds that were driven up from the south and placed on the range late in summer perished outright. Others lost from 75 to 80% of their cattle. This was the death knell to the range cattle business.
Because there were no fences, they drifted. They drifted into coulees and draws and got bogged down and starved, or they drifted into towns and started, gnawing on whatever they could, and they just kept going south. When it thawed in the spring, ranchers went out and looked at the carnage. They found brands on animals from hundreds of miles away. They just kept walking with the snow and the wind driving them from the north, and they walked until they died.
The worst sight of a lifetime. Cattle everywhere, bawling for feed. Dead cattle everywhere.
This winter, the famous winter of 87, snow crusted over and stayed. Cloven-footed cattle can't paw through snow. They just go back in the brush, hump up, tail to the wind, and starve, which made it nice for the wolves. They came through the winter.
So in the meantime, back at the ranch, Charlie Russell is riding the grub line at Jesse Phelps OH Ranch, and as the winter gets worse and the cattle are getting in dire straits and they can see that it's really bad, they're wondering how they're going to tell these rich cattlemen in Helena. Well, they got a letter from Louis Kaufman asking how his cattle were.
One night, Jesse Phelps got a letter from Louis Kaufman And Louie wanted to know how the cattle was doing. And Jesse says to me, I must write a letter to Louie and tell him how tough it is. I was sitting at the table with him and I said, I'll make a sketch to go with it.
And Charlie was spending his time doing various doodling and drawing. He takes a piece of cardboard, probably the box from a box of shirt collars, turns it over, and
He sits down and he draws a picture of a really starved out looking cow with the wolves circling her, bones all hanging out. And she had a Bar brand on her, which was Louis Kaufman's brand.
In the lower corner, he drew a buffalo skull and signed his initials, CMR.
Charlie threw it down on the table. He says, here, send that with your letter. Jesse Phelps looked at it and he says, hell, we don't need no letter, just send this.
They mailed the Nighthawks postcard to Helena, where it was quickly passed around town and then beyond. As the story goes, cattle barons to investors to butchers got drunk on the sight of the drawing and the shock of the bad news. And in time, the person who signed CMR in the corner would become famous.
It is a stunning sketch because it's smaller than a postcard. And in that little space, it is the perfect symbolic expression of the end of the open range. It's astonishing.
Charlie's life was never the same because he was the cowboy artist who, in this quick sketch, had boiled it down to the essence of this tragedy, this epic disaster that occurred.
In some ways, it was a ghostly rerun of the slaughter of the bison, but this time the cataclysm was dead cattle entering the prairie, from the Canadian border to the Texas Panhandle. They called it the Big Die-Off.
Quick question, does anyone know, and I'm sure lots of people do, before Russell decided on the buffalo skull as his trademark with his signature, does anybody remember what he used before that? Pardon? It was a moccasin.
There's several.
Oh, he tried several? Okay, thank you. The moccasin was the very first? Okay, yeah.
As we queue up, you have something?
No.
As we queue up, just hearing all these voices reminds me when this film project started, Gus and I were on the third floor of the journalism building at the University of Montana, in the Indian meeting room, and with papers storyboarded all around the room. And one of the things we decided right on was to tell this story through multiple voices. Charlie's a legend, he's a man, it's a story about the West, and we decided to tell the story through as many voices as we can. So that's part of the texture of the film.
Exactly. We had a Century 21 real estate agent come and talk to us about location, only they suggested character, and character. So, and as Paul mentioned earlier, we've taken a lot of this out of context. The documentary actually starts, well, it doesn't quite start at Russell's funeral, but right after the prologue, then we go into, so you're going to see the funeral, which is really the beginning of Hour One.
As you know, I'm an old horse wrangler, one that has been. In this day of canned music, and I've traded all to hear the bells of the saddle band. Like most men of my age, my heart goes back to the trails that have been plowed under by the master. Most of the men I knew and worked with on the open range had crossed the tall range. Good or bad, it seems to me now, when my memory drifts back, that they were all good enough. So when it comes to my cash-in, I want to go there right. And if the engine is right where he says horses go to, I want my same strength.
7 months later, Charles Marion Russell crossed to the tall range. At the time of his death in 1926, he was not only the so-called chronicler of the West that has passed, but the highest paid artist in America, known in art circles around the world. His work collected by presidents, royalty, and art patrons. More important to Charlie Russell, his work also appeared on calendars and cigar boxes, in saloons and ranch bunkhouses, and with his legions of cherished friends. During his life, he had produced some 4,000 works of art, with a few, almost mysteriously, still turning up in attic trunks and in remote cabins, like Old West petroglyphs. It has been said that the character of Charlie Russell was shaped by Montana, and he in turn helped shape the territory and state. By the time Charlie Russell left the world, the relationship was sealed. He had effectively become the patron saint of the Big Sky State, leaving behind a mixed tribe of friends and acquaintances to mourn. At his funeral, tributes poured in from around the nation. Will Rogers, probably the biggest celebrity in America, and at times an awestruck admirer of Russell, sent a flower arrangement in the shape of a saddle. The city of Great Falls shut down. Thousands lined the streets to watch the glass-windowed hearse carrying Russell's body. They were followed by Russell's first trail boss, the man perhaps most responsible for turning Russell into a cowboy, and a riderless horse named Dexter, with Russell's 6-shooters and holsters strapped to the saddle. As the procession wound through Great Falls, something strange and remarkable happened, especially since it was nearly Halloween in north central Montana. A rainbow appeared. By the time they reached Highland Cemetery, the funeral cortege stretched 2 miles behind them. Funerals are for burying the dead and for resurrecting stories. And every person on the Great Falls streets, at the cemetery, and probably across most of Montana, if not the West that day, had a Charlie Russell story to tell. Almost a century later, many still do.
Perhaps the best measure of the love and affection that Montana held for Charlie Russell is in the census of the people who claim they knew Charlie Russell and had ridden with him on the range, had visited him in his studio, had a drink with him in various saloons in Great Falls and elsewhere. I think if you added up that list of people who all had those stories of having been with Charlie Russell, or their father having been with Charlie Russell, or it exceeds the number of people who ever lived in Montana for the entire time of Charlie Russell's life.
At the top of the rise, the stage stopped to blow the horses, and the passengers got down to stretch their legs. And there, back from the road and under a clump of bunch grass, Charlie found his first buffalo skull.
Essentially, Charlie was retracing a former historic trail, following the metaphoric American compass, going west and growing up with the country.
We've got one more clip after this, right, Gus?
Correct.
Just seeing this again, that funeral scene, we are all part of the tribe here, but what struck me about that is I see this, I still get a little choked up, just seeing this remarkable guy leave us. Part of the mission, I think, of our whole film is to bring Charlie's story to an audience beyond the kind of people who would come to a symposium on a Saturday at the Gilcrease, is to bring his story and his art to a wide Western and American audience. Setting this last section up, it is about, none of us would be here except for one person in Charlie's life.
Come on, you cow nurses, come and get it! Roll out, cow
Charlie Russell, working for a living in the 1880s still meant riding the range, still as a nighthawk. But as things changed in Montana cattle country, so did Charlie Russell. Probably the most important event in Russell's life, or at least his career, occurred in 1895 when he met a recently homeless 16-year-old young woman. Without her, the world probably would never have heard of C.M. Russell.
That sweet-faced young lady had an absolute iron core. Life had made her tougher than she looked.
She may have had a little Scarlett O'Hara in her, that determination, that I'm not going to look back.
Her name was Nancy Cooper, and she didn't look back. And she, too, would never be hungry again, nor left alone in this world. And the way she would do that was by being absolutely determined to make something of the man she would marry.
Without her, I would probably never attempted to soar or reach any height further than make a few pictures for my friends and old acquaintances in the West. She is a businessman and I'm the creative. She lives for tomorrow and I live for yesterday. It's a 50-50 game with us.
Nancy talks about how she understood Charlie had this genius, but she didn't know what it was. She knew that he needed that space to have his memories come up, to have the pictures that he kept in his mind. He once said to her, Nancy, I wish you could see the things that I see.
She understood that she married a man with a gift that few other Americans have ever had, and that gift was going to be fulfilled, and she was going to be the person to fulfill it. She was really a woman of today in the wrong time.
First picture I made with paint was up in Montana. I was working with a cattle outfit, and when winter came round, there was a saloon keeper who wanted the picture of colors to hang up on his wall, so I made it for him. Didn't have anything else to do. Painted it with house paint because I didn't have anything else and didn't know about other paints either.
What do you think Russell's payment for this would be?
A few drinks?
A few drinks.
Exactly. A bar tab. I will bet you anything. It was probably a bar tab hard even to pay for a bar tab he'd already incurred.
Right.
This was a picture of a roundup with the post deck. Anybody know it was somebody's first picture. Where there was a white tent, I painted her all white. And where there was a black horse, I painted him all black.
In the years that followed, Russell's palette would expand. Watercolors and oils would traverse the visual spectrum, especially the colors of Montana's big sky, and his sculpting clay would become bronze. But his subject matter essentially stayed the same. Cowboy camp may have been crude, but it's a variation of a story he would tell and retell, sometimes with a radical view. He would look at things from an American Indian perspective.
Well, I see that powerful sense of what will be lost. But Russell had an innate gift that allowed him to turn his own nostalgia into a national and international nostalgia. So much of the world would look at a Russell painting and think, oh, I wish I were alive then. Yes, I could ride into that world.
And thank you, and we're running short of time, and I'd like to have hopefully a brief session with our other panelists, but before I do, one last really important message. The premiere of this is September 9th, at the Mansfield Center, where there is an 1,800-seat Art Deco theater, and you're all invited.